Welcome to Reality Dread, the home of true horror stories.
I've never liked campgrounds where the tents are set up close together. I liked the small, remote spots in the Appalachians, the ones you can't reach by regular car, where at night all you can hear are streams, the wind, and insects. In early October, I decided to spend 4 days on the Appalachian Trail. I booked 2 different campsites in advance. The first was near a small parking lot in a national forest, and the second was nearly 9 miles further along the trail.
I was traveling alone. Everything went smoothly on the first day. I parked my car in a small gravel lot, signed in at the sign by the entrance, and walked to the spot I'd been assigned. It was about a mile from the road, next to a stream and an old wooden bridge. By evening, I had pitched my tent, built a small campfire, and made dinner. Around 9 o'clock, I noticed a light between the trees. At first, I thought it was another hiker with a flashlight. The light moved slowly, sometimes disappearing behind the tree trunks, then reappearing. I called out, "Hey, is everything okay?" No one answered. The light stopped. Then it went out. I didn't think much of it. On long trips, people often don't feel like talking, especially at night. But around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Someone was walking on the wet leaves behind the tent. The footsteps stopped very close by. I lay motionless and listened. Through the fabric of the tent, I could see only a faint shadow passing by on the outside. Then a quiet voice said, "Nice spot." I didn't answer. A few seconds later, the same voice asked, "Are you alone?" I grabbed my flashlight and said loudly that I had a satellite phone and would call the rangers. After that, it went quiet. I didn't hear the man leave. In the morning, I quickly packed up my things and decided not to stay at that campsite for another night. The second campsite was already booked, so I decided to continue on my route as planned. Before leaving, I went back to the parking lot to get a supply of water from my car. On the registration board, where hikers usually leave information about their route, my form had been turned over. Yesterday, I had filled it out without specifying exactly where I would be spending the next night. I had only written down the permit number and the return date. But now, at the bottom of the page, beneath my signature, someone had written in pencil, "Raven Creek, Site 11. That was the name of my next campsite. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I immediately looked around. The only vehicles in the parking lot were my car and an old white pickup truck without a front license plate. I took a picture of the pickup truck and the permit number on the board. Then I got in my car and drove to the ranger station.
But it was closed. There was a note on the door. The staff member would be back after 3 p.m. I could have canceled the trip and gone home, and I probably should have done just that. But I decided that someone was just trying to scare solo travelers. I told myself that the man in the woods might have seen me checking my map or heard my conversation in the parking lot. So I kept going. I didn't reach Raven Creek until evening. It was a small campground with 4 sites. 3 were empty.
My campsite, number 11, was at the end of the trail, near a stream. When I got closer, I saw that there was already a tent set up at the neighboring campsite. It was gray, old, and very low to the ground, almost invisible among the trees. There was no campfire, no car, and no one around. I figured someone had just gone for a walk. But as I was setting up my tent, it seemed to me that someone was watching me from the woods behind the neighboring site. I couldn't see a face, just movement among the trees. I decided not to build a campfire. I ate quickly and immediately crawled into my tent. About an hour later, I heard someone walking quietly around my campsite. Not near the tent, further away. as if checking where my things were, where my backpack was, and where I'd left my boots. Then I heard the zipper of the neighboring tent. It slowly unzipped. Then it zipped back up. I lay there in complete darkness, trying not to breathe too loudly. A few minutes later, someone stopped right by my tent. The fabric gave slightly inward, as if someone had run their fingers across it. Then I pressed the button on my satellite phone and started dialing the emergency number. But before the call went through, a voice came from outside. "Are you still planning to head to Blackstone Ridge in the morning?" I froze. Blackstone Ridge wasn't on my permit. It was a route I'd planned to take only after the hike was over. It was jotted down in the notes on my phone. No one could have known about it, except for the person who saw my phone. I turned on my flashlight and shouted. In response, I heard quick footsteps. They were heading toward the stream. I ran out of the tent. The gray tent next to mine was open. There was no one inside, but my old paper map was lying on the ground, the one I'd left in the car. All the places where I planned to stop over the next 2 days were circled in red marker. I grabbed my backpack and set off down the trail, keeping my flashlight on. It was almost 3 miles to the road. I walked quickly, sometimes running, ignoring my fatigue. Several times I heard movement in the woods behind me, but I didn't turn around. When I finally reached the parking lot, it was around 4 in the morning. My car was still there, but the driver's door wasn't locked. I was sure I'd locked the car. Everything inside looked normal, until I opened the glove compartment. My spare key was lying there, and next to it, a folded piece of paper. It had just one sentence written on it. "You don't have to tell people where you're going." I left before dawn. A few hours later, I arrived at the police station and showed them the photos, the map, and the note. They sent rangers to check Raven Creek. The gray tent was gone. The white pickup truck was gone too. An officer said that in areas like this, you sometimes come across people who live on abandoned roads and watch tourists. Sometimes they steal food or gear. But there's one thing I still don't understand. My phone wasn't password protected. Someone could have looked at my notes while I was asleep, but I'd left the paper itinerary in the car before the first night. So he was near my car before I ran into him in the woods. He knew I'd be coming alone. He knew where I'd be staying. And he may have targeted me even before I pitched my first tent. I've always been a logical person. I don't believe in ghosts, curses, or any of that stuff. I'm an engineer. I solve problems with facts and evidence. But what happened to me last fall made me question everything I thought I knew about reality. It was late September. My marriage had just fallen apart, and I needed to get away. Not to a resort or a hotel. I needed silence. Real silence. So, I packed my truck and drove deep into the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest in Arizona. I wasn't running away from my problems. I was trying to find a version of myself that still made sense. I'd found this spot on an old forum. It was off a Forest Service road that had been decommissioned years ago. No cell service, no signs of civilization, just miles of ponderosa pine and juniper. I set up camp in a small clearing near a dried-up creek bed. The ground was covered in pine needles, and the air smelled like dust and dry wood. It was perfect. For the first 2 days, it was exactly what I needed. I read, I hiked, I sat by the fire and watched the stars. I felt my shoulders relaxing for the first time in months. But on the third night, things started to change. I woke up at around 3 a.m. At first, I didn't know why. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No crickets, no wind. Just dead silence. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening. And then I heard it. A faint, rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from somewhere outside my tent, maybe 20 feet away. It was slow and deliberate, like someone tapping a stick against a tree trunk, over and over. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. I shined the beam into the darkness. Nothing. The sound stopped the moment I moved. I stood there for a long time, scanning the tree line. No movement. No eyes reflecting the light. Nothing. I told myself it was a woodpecker, or a branch creaking in the wind. I went back inside and tried to sleep. The next morning I went for a walk. I wanted to explore the creek bed that I'd seen from the clearing. About half a mile downstream, I found something that made me stop. There was a small, makeshift shelter tucked under a rocky overhang. It was built from branches and debris, like something a survivalist would make. It was old. The wood was gray and brittle, but inside, on a flat rock, there was a pile of objects. A broken watch, a woman's silver ring, a child's shoe. A faded photograph of a family I didn't recognize. And on the rock next to them, carved into the stone with something sharp, was a single word. Mine. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I stood there for what felt like a minute, just staring. Then I backed away slowly and walked back to my camp. I didn't touch anything. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps. Not animal footsteps, human footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing around my tent in a wide circle. I grabbed my flashlight and my camp knife. I sat up, not moving, just listening. The footsteps continued for about a minute, and then they stopped. I waited for what felt like an eternity. Nothing. I laid back down, but I didn't sleep. When the sun finally came up, I got dressed and stepped outside. Everything was normal. My fire pit was cold. The forest was quiet. But then I looked up at a tree about 30 feet from my tent. There was a red mark on the bark. It looked like fresh paint. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't paint. It was blood. Human blood. It was a handprint. A perfect, crimson handprint pressed onto the bark at about head height, as if someone had stood there, watching me sleep, and rested their hand against the tree. I stared at it for a long time. My heart was pounding. I tried to tell myself it was just blood from a dead animal. A hunter, maybe. But the handprint was perfectly formed. Fingers, palm, everything. There was no mistaking it. I looked down at the ground around the tree, and I saw them. Footprints. Barefoot footprints in the dry dirt, walking in a slow circle around my tent. They weren't fresh. They were from the night before, and they were small. Too small for an adult. The footprints circled my tent 3 times, and then they just stopped. Right in front of the tree with the handprint, as if whoever had left them had just vanished into the air. My first instinct was to pack up and leave, but the road was 3 miles of rough, unpaved trail. It would take me at least an hour to get out. I needed a plan. I looked around the campsite more carefully. I checked my truck. Everything was fine, nothing was missing. But I noticed something else. Near the edge of my camp, there was a pile of stones. Small, smooth stones arranged in a perfect circle. In the center, there was a single white feather. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in my truck with the doors locked, watching the tree line through the windshield. I kept the engine running and the headlights on. At around midnight, I saw a figure step out from between 2 trees. It was about 50 feet away, standing at the edge of the light. It was small,
child-sized, and it was wearing a long, dark dress. I froze. My hand instinctively reached for the ignition, ready to drive, but I couldn't look away. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me through the windshield. It had no face, just a dark, empty space where its face should have been. For a moment, time seemed to stop, and then the figure raised its arm. It pointed directly at me, and then it pointed at the ground in front of my truck, as if it was showing me something. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I slammed the gear into reverse, spun the truck around, and drove. I don't remember the drive out. I was in complete panic mode. I just remember reaching the main highway and pulling over to catch my breath. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold the steering wheel. I didn't call anyone. I didn't report it. Who would believe me? I packed up my stuff and drove home. It wasn't until I got back to my apartment that I noticed something. My dog, a golden retriever named Buddy, was sitting by the door. He was shaking. There was a small, smooth stone next to him on the floor. It was the same kind of stone as the ones in the clearing, and on my kitchen table there was a white feather. It's been 6 months, and I've never been able to explain it. I've moved away since then. I don't live anywhere near Arizona anymore. But sometimes, when I'm driving home late at night, I catch a glimpse of my rearview mirror, and I could swear I see a small, dark figure sitting in the back seat. And when I turn around, of course, there's no one there. But the feeling, that deep, primal fear that something is always watching, never really goes away.